It was a crisp morning at Grant Holdings, and the air inside the glass-walled skyscraper was thick with tension. The morning light filtered through the towering windows, casting long shadows across the rows of sleek desks and high-end monitors. The conference room on the 42nd floor where the company's most critical meetings took place was quiet, its usual hum replaced with an uncomfortable silence. Alex Grant, the 38-year-old founder and CEO of the company, stood at the front, staring at a financial report that flashed on the screen. His sharp suit and confident posture projected power, but internally, Alex felt anything but powerful. Just a year ago, Alex had been on top of the world, leading one of the most successful tech firms in Silicon Valley. He had a hand in some of the biggest investments, projects worth billions. But now, after a catastrophic investment failure, his company was in the red, and his reputation was on the line. The boardroom was filled with executives, all eyes on him, but none of them seemed convinced. Their faces were tense, their bodies stiff. The weight of failure hung heavily in the room. "Alex, we need answers," Claudia, the CFO, said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but it carried the burden of the company's future. "We've lost money, and we need a plan to get out of this hole. You promised results." Alex looked up at the team gathered around the long conference table. He could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He had always been the one to lead, to make bold decisions that took the company to new heights. But today, he wasn't sure if he had the answers. His gut told him that the traditional methods would no longer work. Something had to change. He ran his fingers through his hair and exhaled deeply, setting the report aside. "We're not going to cut corners," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "We're going to focus on what really matters, our people. We need to change how we operate. Focus less on quick profits and more on long-term value. It's going to take time, but this is our way out." Claudia raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious? This is a tech company, not a charity. People don't stay loyal for the sake of loyalty. We need numbers." Alex paused, looking at the faces around him. They were skeptical, and with good reason. But in his gut, Alex knew the old model, cutthroat and profit-obsessed, had failed. He needed something more. He needed trust. Trust in the people who worked for him, and trust that they could pull through together. But where could he start? How could he rebuild both the company and his personal integrity? Alex had spent so much of his life focused on power, dominance, an expansion that he had neglected the one thing that had always been there, his people. Just then, the door opened and Sophie Young, a new project manager, walked into the room. She was carrying a laptop, clearly ready for whatever the meeting would throw at her. Sophie was in her late 20s, a rising star at Grant Holdings, recently hired to help guide the company through its restructuring. She had the sharp mind of a strategist, but was also known for her ability to see beyond the numbers and focus on the human side of things. Sophie had been watching Alex from the moment she walked in. She could feel the tension, but more than that, she could see the vulnerability in him that no one else seemed to notice. She'd heard the rumors about the Golden Boy CEO who had lost it all and was now trying to fix his mistakes. And yet, there was something different about him. Sophie set her laptop down on the table and took a seat. Her gaze shifted between Alex and the rest of the room. She didn't look intimidated. In fact, she looked like someone who was ready to step in and help lead. "Alex, I've been reviewing the new data," Sophie said, breaking the silence in the room. "I think I have an idea for where we should start." Her voice was steady, and she spoke with an assuredness that caught everyone's attention. Alex raised an eyebrow. "Go on," Sophie took a breath. "We're missing something big here. We're so focused on the numbers that we've forgotten about the people who make this company run. We need to stop treating them like resources to exploit and start treating them like partners. That means changing how we lead, how we listen, and how we operate as a company." The room was quiet for a moment as Sophie's words hung in the air. Alex could feel the weight of her statement. The people. In all his years of leading Grant Holdings, he had never put that first. It was always about the deals, the growth, the results. Sophie's voice broke his reverie. "If we really want to make this company work again, we need to invest in the culture, not just the technology. People are going to work harder and be more loyal if they feel like they're valued and heard. If we keep pushing them without giving them a reason to care, we're going to keep losing." Alex sat back in his chair. He hadn't expected this kind of feedback, especially not from someone so new to the company. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized she was right. He had been so focused on being a powerful leader that he'd ignored the very thing that made the company thrive in the first place, the people who believed in it. "All right, Sophie," Alex said, his voice a little softer now. "Let's make a plan. Start with a proposal on how we can begin to shift the company culture. I'll need to see numbers, of course, but I want you to focus on creating something sustainable for our people." Sophie nodded. "I'll get started right away." The room was silent as Alex watched Sophie walk out, feeling something unfamiliar stirring inside him. Hope for the first time in a long time. Alex felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward, not through power or control, but through trust and partnership. The following morning, Sophie arrived early at the office, ready to dive into her new assignment. As soon as she walked in, the buzz of the open floor plan hit her, a mixture of scattered conversations and clattering keyboards. All the sounds of a company on the edge. It felt a bit chaotic, but in a way, Sophie liked it. It was a sign that the company had life. It was just struggling to figure out how to breathe again. She sat down at her desk, flipping through the reports Alex had asked for, analyzing the data that would help him get a clear picture of where things stood. But while numbers were important, Sophie knew they weren't the whole story. She needed to understand the culture of the company, the underlying current of fear and frustration that seemed to hang in the air. The clock on her desk blinked 9 a.m., and she stood, walking across the floor to the coffee station. Just as she poured herself a cup, Maya, the company's head of operations, walked in. Maya was sharp, everybody knew it, but there was something about her demeanor that suggested she was just as worn down as the rest of the team. "Maya." Sophie greeted her, offering a small smile. "Morning, Sophie," Maya replied, her voice tight but professional. "How's the first day treating you?" "Good," Sophie said, leaning against the counter, unsure of how much to share. "I've been going through some of the reports, but I'm starting to think there's a bigger issue here than just numbers." Maya raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of her coffee. "I'm listening. I think the company's biggest problem isn't the market shifts or the bad investments," Sophie said, leaning in. "It's the lack of trust between employees, between leadership, and most importantly, between the company and its people. The team feels like they're being treated as resources, not partners." Maya's expression softened, as if she'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. "I've been thinking the same thing. We've been pushing people too hard, and the results speak for themselves." "But Alex," she trailed off, glancing across the office toward the CEO's corner office, where Alex was probably already making phone calls. He's been running the company like a machine. He's good at driving numbers, but he forgets that people are the ones keeping those numbers moving. Exactly, Sophie agreed, nodding. That's why I'm planning to present Alex with a proposal. We need to shift the company's focus. We need to show him that investing in people will lead to the kind of results he wants. I don't think he's realized how bad it's gotten. He's still stuck on old models. Maya looked at Sophie with a new kind of respect. You're ambitious. I like that. But don't expect Alex to embrace this easily. He's been running things his way for years, and his ego is tied up in the success of this company. Changing his mindset isn't going to be easy. I know, Sophie said, a hint of determination creeping into her voice. But we can't keep running a company on fumes. It's not sustainable. If we don't change things, we'll lose the best of what we have left. Maya paused, thinking for a moment. All right, I'm with you. I'll help you get this off the ground. If Alex doesn't listen, we'll make him listen. At 10:30 a.m., Sophie made her way to Alex's office. His assistant greeted her with a curt smile and directed her to the door. Sophie hesitated for a second before knocking. She had prepared for this meeting, but the pressure was starting to build in her chest. Come in, came Alex's voice, low and calm. Sophie opened the door and stepped inside. Alex was sitting behind his sleek glass desk, looking over some financial projections. He glanced up briefly and offered a tight smile. Sophie, what can I do for you? Sophie stood there for a moment, trying to calm the nerves that had been rising since she'd walked into the building. She set down her laptop on the desk in front of him. The proposal open and ready to go. I've been thinking about how we can improve things here at Grant Holdings, Sophie began, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of conviction. We've had a rough year, and I know you're focused on making the numbers work. But I believe there's a bigger issue at play. The company is broken because the culture is broken. Alex sat back in his chair, clearly intrigued. Go on. People don't feel like they're part of the mission anymore, Sophie continued. They're burnt out, underpaid, and overworked. We're pushing them too hard, and it's creating resentment. That's why I think we need to make some changes, starting with how we treat people. They're not just resources. They're the lifeblood of this company. Alex nodded slowly, his fingers tapping on the desk. He didn't say anything for a moment, letting her words sink in. I've heard this before. Sophie, Alex said, his tone cautious. But I don't think you understand the pressure I'm under. The market's unstable, and if we don't act fast, we'll be out of business. Sophie didn't back down. I understand that, Alex. I really do. But what I'm proposing is not just about making people feel good. It's about building a culture that fosters trust, creativity, and innovation, because when people feel like their work matters, they perform better. And when they perform better, the company performs better. Alex sat up straighter in his chair. There was a brief silence before he spoke again. You're suggesting a cultural overhaul. That's not a quick fix, Sophie. It takes time, and it doesn't always guarantee results. I know it's risky, Sophie acknowledged, but I believe it's the only way forward. People are leaving because they feel like they're just cogs in a machine. They're not inspired anymore. But if we show them we value them, we give them the support they need, they'll come back. They'll be invested in the company again. Alex studied her for a long moment. His gaze was intense, as if he were measuring her every word, every idea. He'd heard plenty of pitches before, but there was something about Sophie's approach that felt different. "All right," Alex said, his voice firm. "I'll give you a shot. We'll put your proposal into action, but we'll have to move quickly. I'm not convinced that people will just fall in line, but I'm willing to try." Sophie smiled, but it wasn't one of victory. It was the smile of someone who had just started a long journey. "Thank you, Alex. I won't let you down." As she left the office, Sophie felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. She knew this was only the beginning. She had the chance to prove that there was another way, a better way. And this time, she wouldn't back down. She wasn't just here to fix a company. She was here to change lives. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Sophie Young. Armed with the green light from Alex, she dove into reshaping the company's culture. Sophie knew that making this kind of change wasn't going to be easy, especially given the state of the company and the pressure Alex was under. But she was determined to prove that people could be the key to reviving Grant Holdings. She started with small, practical changes. The first was a series of employee surveys that asked not just about their satisfaction with work, but about their needs, their struggles, and their thoughts on the company's leadership. Sophie was tired of hearing about problems from top-down reports. She wanted to hear directly from the people who made things happen, those who were feeling the grind every single day. "We can't fix what we don't understand," Sophie said to herself, as she looked over the first batch of responses. Some of them were eye-opening. Many employees felt disconnected from the company's goals. Others complained about the lack of work-life balance and emotional burnout. It was clear that something had gone wrong in the company's heart, and now it was time to rebuild. Alex had agreed to give her free rein to implement these changes. But there were moments when Sophie felt as if he were just waiting for her to fail. He still clung to the old models, the ones that valued hard numbers over human interaction. But Sophie wasn't about to give up just yet. One evening, after a long day of reviewing feedback, Sophie found herself in the office kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee. The soft hum of the coffee machine echoed in the stillness. She was about to leave when Alex walked in, his posture stiff but less guarded than usual. "Late night?" he asked, noticing the stack of papers in front of her. Sophie gave him a small smile. "Trying to get ahead. There's a lot to work through. You know, I didn't expect everyone to be so open about their frustrations." Alex leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You've opened Pandora's box," he said, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "But it's a good thing. We can't keep pretending everything's fine." "I know," Sophie said, her tone softening. "I think we need to start with trust. People don't trust leadership right now. They don't feel heard." Alex sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's hard to turn the ship around. You know that, right?" Sophie nodded. "It won't happen overnight. But we can't keep running the company on fear and pressure. We've been doing that for too long." Alex stared at the floor, thinking for a moment. "All right. Show me what you've got, Sophie. Let's start making these changes." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She had the chance to implement the changes she believed in, but she knew Alex's support was crucial. If he was truly willing to embrace this transformation, things could shift in ways that were beyond just numbers and profits. Building trust, Sophie began to transform the workplace by starting with the leadership team. She knew that in order to make real change, the executives and department heads needed to be on board. Over the next few weeks, she held a series of one-on-one meetings with the senior leaders, discussing everything from work culture to specific pain points within their teams. At one of these meetings, she sat down with Maya, the head of operations, who had been skeptical of Sophie's people-first approach from the start. Maya had seen the company fail too many times to believe in anything that wasn't driven by hard results. "You really think this will work?" Maya asked, folding her arms across her chest. "I've seen a lot of people come and go with great ideas, but we're in the business of results, not kumbaya moments." Sophie took a deep breath. "I believe it will work, Maya, but it won't happen if we keep thinking that profits come before people. We're here for the long haul, right?" Maya leaned back in her chair, studying Sophie. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "All right, I'm in. But if this fails, we both go down with the ship." Sophie smiled, relief washing over her. "Agreed, but I believe we're doing the right thing." As Maya slowly came around, Sophie's plan began to gain momentum. She worked closely with HR to implement changes like flexible work hours and more focus on mental health resources. She encouraged managers to take a more active role in supporting their teams, not just driving results, but fostering a sense of belonging and appreciation. The feedback was gradual but telling. As Sophie had hoped, the first signs of cultural change started to show. Employees, once disengaged, were beginning to speak up more, offer ideas, and even celebrate each other's achievements. The mood in the office began to shift from one of stress to one of collaboration and growth. The test of trust but change is never simple. While some teams thrived under the new initiatives, others resisted. And the first real test came when Alex announced a major restructuring that would affect some of the senior leadership positions. Sophie was the first to hear the news. Alex called her into his office, his expression more serious than usual. "I'm about to pull the trigger on this restructuring," Alex said, his voice tight. "There's going to be backlash. Some of these people won't be happy. They've been here for years. You're going to need to help guide the transition." Sophie felt a pit in her stomach. Restructuring was never an easy task, especially when it involved making difficult decisions about people's roles within the company. "I understand," Sophie said, trying to keep her voice steady, "but we can't do this without being transparent. We need to give them a reason to trust us." Alex looked at her, his brow furrowed. "How do you plan on doing that? We can't coddle them. They need to know the reality of the situation." "Real talk is important, but so is empathy," Sophie replied. "We can be honest about the challenges ahead, but we also need to show them the bigger picture, the vision for what's next, the growth we're trying to build. And we have to be consistent with the message that we care about their well-being." Alex didn't respond immediately. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "All right, Sophie. I trust you on this. You handle the communication, and I'll support you. But I need you to make sure that we stay on track. I can't afford another mistake." Sophie nodded. This was a turning point. She had gained Alex's trust, but now she had to prove it. The restructuring would test whether their new culture could withstand real challenges. But she was confident this was the moment for transformation. The morning after Alex announced the restructuring plan, Sophie walked into the office feeling the weight of the decisions made the previous day. The energy on the floor had shifted once again, but this time there was an edge to a tan undercurrent of uncertainty. Change was never easy, especially in a company like Grant Holdings, where the stakes were high and the consequences of failure were enormous. Sophie had always prided herself on being able to read the room. But today the room felt dense, as if everyone was holding their breath. There were whispers in the corners of the office, behind closed doors. The restructuring was a necessary move, but it would undoubtedly hurt people. People who had given their loyalty to the company for years, who were now facing layoffs or shifts in their roles. Sophie knew that if the company was going to survive, they needed to handle this transition with care. It wasn't just about executing the logistics of restructuring. It was about maintaining trust, the trust Alex had started to rebuild, and the trust she had worked so hard to establish with the team. She sat down at her desk and reviewed the communication plan she had put together. It was clear, straightforward, and empathetic. The announcement would come first thing this morning, followed by one-on-one meetings with each affected employee. No one would hear about the changes in a mass email. Sophie was determined to ensure the company treated this process with respect and dignity, no matter how painful it would be. The first email went out at 9 a.m. It wasn't flashy, and it didn't sugarcoat the situation. It simply acknowledged the tough road ahead and promised transparency. Sophie spent the next several hours on video calls, walking each individual through their options, listening to their concerns, and offering resources to help them transition. Later that afternoon, Alex asked Sophie to join him for a private meeting. As she walked into his office, she noticed the tension in his posture. He was still standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. The weight of leadership seemed to press down on him more than ever before. "Sophie." "Come in," Alex said, his voice low but steady. "I've been thinking about the restructuring. We've had some pushback from HR, and I'm concerned about how some of the senior leaders will take this. Some of them are already questioning the direction." Sophie sat down across from him, her hands folded on the desk. She didn't let her nerves show, but she could feel a knot in her stomach. The restructuring was not just a business decision, it was a personal one that would affect everyone, including Alex. "Alex, I understand the concerns," Sophie said, trying to keep her voice calm. "But I think it's important that we stay focused on the bigger picture. Yes, people are upset right now, but that's because we're challenging the status quo. And if we're being honest with ourselves, the status quo hasn't been working for a while." Alex turned to face her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "So what do you propose we do? Just keep pushing through it and hope people will get on board? Some of these leaders are critical to the future of the company. If they don't buy into this change, we're going to lose them." Sophie paused, considering her next words carefully. "We need to address their concerns head-on. We need to make them understand that this isn't just about cutting costs or simplifying operations. It's about setting the company up for long-term success. If we want to survive and thrive, we need to build a culture that values our people and makes them feel invested in the company's future." Alex sat back in his chair, staring at her, his fingers tapping gently on the desk. Sophie knew that Alex was still grappling with the concept of a people-first culture. He was used to thinking of his company in terms of results, numbers, and metrics. He had built this empire by being strategic and calculated, not by focusing on feelings or emotions. "I get it, Sophie," Alex said, his voice softer now. "But there's one thing I'm still struggling with: control. In this new culture, how do we keep accountability? How do we ensure people don't take advantage of the freedom we're giving them?" Sophie leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Accountability doesn't have to come from micromanagement, Alex. It comes from setting clear expectations and leading by example. If we show the team that we trust them, they will rise to the occasion. They'll take ownership of their work because they'll feel like they're part of something bigger than just their job description. And that's what we need if we're going to succeed in the long run. Alex remained silent for a moment, his eyes searching hers. Sophie knew he was processing everything she had just said, weighing it against his own experience. Finally, he nodded. "You're right," he said, almost to himself. "We've been running this company with an iron fist, but maybe it's time to let go a little. I've been so focused on the business side of things that I've forgotten about the human side. I'll give you more support with this cultural shift, Sophie. I trust you." Sophie felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had just earned Alex's trust, and that meant more than anything. With his backing, she could move forward with the changes she knew were necessary to save the company. "Thank you, Alex," she said, smiling softly. "We're in this together, but it's going to take time. It won't happen overnight." "I know," Alex replied, "but I'm ready for the long haul. Let's rebuild this company the right way." The following weeks felt like a balancing act for Sophie. The pressure to perform and deliver results, coupled with her determination to transform the company's culture, weighed heavily on her, but she didn't back down. Alex Grant, now fully invested in the idea of reshaping Grant Holdings, had given her the authority to lead the charge. But the challenges of actually implementing change were much more complicated than Sophie had anticipated. The leadership team had started to come around, but some members were more resistant than others. Maya, the head of operations, was particularly skeptical of the shift towards a more people-centric culture. Sophie had spent several long meetings with her, trying to align their goals and demonstrate how this change wasn't just about sentimentality, but about building a foundation for long-term success. "People are the ones who make a business," Sophie had told Maya during one of their discussions. "Not just the product or the bottom line. If we don't invest in them, we won't have anything left to run the company." Maya didn't fully buy into the philosophy, but even she couldn't deny that things were starting to improve on the ground level. Employees were beginning to feel more engaged, more willing to share ideas, and more invested in their work. Sophie saw a shift in the atmosphere, a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. People were showing up not just to collect a paycheck, but to contribute to something bigger. One afternoon, as Sophie was working through more employee feedback this time, the results from a recent company-wide survey on work-life balance, her phone buzzed with an email from Alex. "Sophie, we need to talk about the quarterly numbers. I know you've been focused on the cultural shift, but we need a solid growth plan for Q3. Our investors are breathing down my neck. We need to show results." Sophie sighed, feeling the familiar tension creep back in. She had known this moment would come. Alex's focus on short-term profits was a constant reminder that their paths were still not fully aligned. She knew he was under immense pressure from the board, but that didn't change her belief in the importance of long-term investment in people. She couldn't afford to let the shift in culture slip because of a few quarterly numbers. With determination, Sophie drafted a response to Alex. "I understand the urgency. Alex, I'll have a proposal ready for Q3 by the end of the week. But we need to integrate the cultural shift into our growth plan. Without it, we won't sustain the momentum we're seeing from our teams." She sent the email, took a deep breath, and set her phone aside. It was time to roll up her sleeves and get to work. She couldn't let herself be distracted by the pressure. Not now. The proposal a few days later. Sophie presented her proposal for Q3 growth to Alex. It wasn't just another growth plan with numbers and targets. It was a plan that focused on people-first metrics as much as it did on financials. Sophie's proposal emphasized employee engagement, retention, and development as key drivers for the company's growth. She also introduced a new initiative, Employee Innovation Days, where employees could take a day off from their regular work to focus on side projects or new ideas. Sophie had seen how empowering employees to explore their own creative solutions to problems could lead to unexpected breakthroughs. She hoped this initiative would foster a deeper sense of ownership and creativity within the team. When Sophie walked into Alex's office with the proposal in hand, she was prepared for some resistance. But what she wasn't prepared for was Alex's silence as he read through the document. When he finally looked up, Sophie was bracing for a barrage of questions or criticisms. Instead, Alex simply nodded. "I see where you're going with this," he said. "It's risky, but I'll back it." Sophie blinked, surprised by his response. "You're willing to give it a shot?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "We don't have the luxury of playing it safe anymore." "But I need results, Sophie. If this works, we need to show the board. We need to prove that a people-first approach can lead to sustainable growth." "I'll make sure we have the numbers," Sophie replied confidently. She could feel a rush of excitement. This was her moment, her opportunity to not only prove her vision, but to prove to Alex that building a culture of trust and collaboration could lead to real business results. The first signs of success as the weeks rolled by, Sophie's proposal began to take shape. Employee Innovation Days kicked off, and though it started small, Sophie began to see sparks of creativity that weren't there before. One employee developed an internal tool that helped automate processes, cutting down the team's workload by hours every week. Another team had come up with a new idea for product development, which ended up being a game changer for a new service they had been planning. Sophie presented these successes in a meeting with Alex, hoping that they would prove the value of the new approach. "This is just the beginning," she said, laying out the early wins. Asterisk, asterisk, we're building something that's sustainable not just in terms of our product offerings, but in terms of our people. Alex listened intently, nodding along. "I didn't think it would work this fast," he admitted, "but I'm starting to see it, Sophie. Maybe we've been too focused on the wrong things." Sophie smiled, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling in her chest. She could feel the tide beginning to turn, not just within the company, but within Alex himself. For the first time, he was seeing the connection between people-first strategies and business results. The testing ground, but the real test came when the company faced a major client crisis. One of their largest accounts was threatening to pull out, claiming that they were dissatisfied with the progress of a project. The situation was tense, and Alex knew that the company needed to act quickly to avoid losing the account and the revenue that came with it. Sophie was thrown into the middle of the storm. She led a team that worked around the clock, putting together a solution for the client. It was a moment where everything she had worked for, the values she had fought to instill, would be put to the ultimate test as the hours stretched into the night. Sophie kept the team focused, not just on the task at hand, but on maintaining trust and communication. She constantly checked in with each team member, made sure they had the support they needed, and reminded them that they were working together to fix this not for Alex or for the client, but for the team's pride. The team delivered a solution. And after a tense 48 hours, the client was satisfied. Sophie had led them through the crisis without resorting to pressure tactics or intense micromanagement. Instead, She had created an environment where the team felt empowered. And as a result, they delivered under pressure. Alex was impressed. "You did it," he said, after the crisis had been averted. "You handled the situation with grace. And you did it by trusting your people, not just pushing them." Sophie smiled, but she knew the work wasn't over. This success wasn't just a win for her or for Alex, it was a win for the entire team, a testament to what a people-first culture could achieve when given the opportunity. The weeks following the successful resolution of the client crisis had been a turning point for Grant Holdings. Things were looking up, and Sophie felt the momentum shifting in her favor. Employees were showing more engagement, Alex was backing her initiatives, and there was a newfound sense of collaboration among teams that hadn't been there before. However, success always came with its own set of challenges, and Sophie soon realized that change, especially the kind of change she was trying to implement, was never easy. The company was still grappling with its past habits, and the transition from a results-driven culture to a people-first one wasn't as seamless as she had hoped. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the tension hit an all-time high. Sophie was sitting in her office, reviewing the latest employee engagement survey results, when Maya walked in, a frown etched on her face. "Alex wants to see you." "Now," Maya said, her voice low. Sophie felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had been expecting a check-in meeting with Alex, but something about the way Maya had said it made Sophie uneasy. She grabbed her notes and followed Maya down the hallway to Alex's office. As they entered the sleek, glass-walled office, Sophie saw Alex standing by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the city. His usual sharp confidence seemed to be gone, replaced by something more uncertain. "Sophie, come in," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophie set the folder down on his desk, trying to gauge his mood. Alex had been supportive of the cultural changes Sophie had been implementing, but there was something in the air today that felt off. "What's going on, Alex?" Sophie asked, taking a seat across from him. Alex turned to face her, his expression serious. "We have a problem," he said. "I've been talking to the board. They're not convinced about the long-term benefits of this cultural shift. They see the improvements in engagement, but they want to see hard numbers. We need to deliver faster results. We can't keep sacrificing productivity for goodwill." Sophie's heart sank. She had known this moment would come. The board was always going to demand tangible results, but she hadn't expected it to happen so soon. "I understand that," Sophie said carefully, "but the results we're seeing are not just about numbers. We're building something more sustainable here. People are performing better because they feel valued. The work we've been doing isn't just about getting faster returns. It's about ensuring that the company can continue to grow, both in revenue and in loyalty." Alex ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I know that, Sophie. But right now, the board wants to see action, not ideals. And I'm under pressure to show them that these changes are making a difference, not just in employee satisfaction, but in profits. If we don't hit certain targets, we risk losing funding." Sophie could feel the tension building in her chest. She had fought hard for the changes she was implementing, and now it felt like all of that was at risk because of the board's expectations. "Alex, we need to trust the process," she said firmly. "I'm not asking for a free pass, I'm asking for time. It takes time for people to feel the impact of a cultural shift. You can't put a price tag on loyalty and trust, but I'm confident that in the long run, this will pay off. We need to lead by example, not just by the numbers." Alex looked at her, his gaze conflicted. For a moment, Sophie wasn't sure if he would agree or if he would push her back. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer. "I hear you, Sophie. But the board won't wait forever. They want to see the numbers in the next quarter. We need to prove that what you're doing isn't just a nice idea, but a plan that leads to sustainable growth. Otherwise, I'll have to make some tough decisions. We're all walking a tightrope here." Sophie's heart pounded. She had been playing a long game, but now it was clear that the pressure was on. The transformation she was championing was at a critical point, and the next few months would decide whether it succeeded or failed. The pitch the next few days were a blur for Sophie. She knew what needed to be done, but the task ahead was overwhelming. She had to prove to the board that the changes were having a measurable impact. The company needed to see not only improvements in employee engagement, but also increased productivity and revenue. Sophie spent hours gathering data, reviewing project timelines, and working with her team to compile evidence of how the changes were starting to show results. She worked alongside Maya, who helped gather the numbers they needed to demonstrate productivity gains in key areas. They were seeing higher collaboration, faster issue resolution, and improved customer feedback, positive signs, but not the kind of numbers the board could get excited about. As she pieced together the proposal, Sophie started to feel the weight of responsibility. The changes she had initiated weren't just her ideas, they were her vision for the company's future. If she couldn't prove their effectiveness, the trust she'd worked so hard to build would crumble, and she would lose Alex's support. Finally, she finished the presentation metrics, feedback, projections. She compiled the growth numbers from the employee innovation days, the productivity increases from remote work policies, and even the mental health improvements that had been reported. That afternoon, Sophie sat across from Alex once more. He was reviewing her presentation, his eyes scanning the charts and graphs. "This is a good start," Alex said, nodding. "But I still need to see hard numbers. If we're not showing clear financial growth by next quarter, I'm afraid we'll lose momentum." Sophie took a deep breath. She had done everything she could, and now it was time to take a leap of faith. "Alex, I'm not asking you to ignore the financials," she said. "I'm asking you to see the bigger picture. These changes are laying the foundation for a company that is more agile, more innovative, and more connected. If we keep pushing for short-term profits, we'll burn out our employees, and we'll end up right back where we started. I believe in this approach. I just need you to trust it." Alex looked at her, his face inscrutable. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Sophie. We'll go with it. But next quarter, I need to see both the human side and the financial side. No exceptions." Sophie smiled, relieved but knowing the road ahead would still be challenging. But for the first time, she felt like she had Alex truly on her side. He wasn't just agreeing with her, he was believing in her. The following weeks passed in a blur of strategy meetings, number crunching, and more late nights than Sophie cared to admit. She had put everything into making sure her approach was not only right, but also measurable. The team was behind her, but the pressure to deliver quick results had begun to wear on everyone. Grant Holdings was no longer just a company under pressure. It had become a testing ground for an entirely new way of operating, a way that focused on trust and long-term development rather than immediate returns. Sophie knew that if she didn't get the numbers to back up her vision, the board would pull the plug. The day of the quarterly presentation had arrived, and Sophie was sitting in the boardroom, her laptop open in front of her. surrounded by graphs, metrics, and projections. Alex was seated at the head of the table, looking just as serious as he had in the first meeting they'd had together. Sophie could feel his eyes on her, and it added another layer of pressure to an already difficult situation. "We're all set to go, Sophie," Alex said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. "The board's here. It's your show." Sophie nodded, though her heart was racing. She had worked tirelessly to present a case for how their cultural shift was already paying off and how it would continue to do so, but the truth was, this was as much about trust as it was about results. She had spent months building relationships, investing in the team's growth, and fostering collaboration, but now she had to prove that it could lead to something tangible. The board members filed in, and Sophie could see the skepticism in their eyes. They were all high-powered executives who cared about the bottom line, not employee morale. This wasn't going to be an easy sell. As Sophie began her presentation, the room felt tense, almost suffocating. The usual buzz of quiet chatter was absent. Everyone was focused on her, waiting for the hard data that would justify the change they had been pushing for. "Good afternoon, everyone," Sophie began, her voice steady but filled with a quiet confidence. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present today. Over the past quarter, we've worked hard to align our goals with the company's long-term vision, and we've made significant progress. But, as we know, change takes time. I'm here to show you how we're already seeing the beginnings of that change, though why we're on track to see even more in the future." She clicked to the first slide, which displayed a comparison of employee engagement metrics from 3 months ago versus today. "As you can see," Sophie continued, "we've seen a 25% increase in overall employee satisfaction. That's not just about morale, it's about performance. Employees who feel valued are more engaged, which leads to higher productivity, more innovative solutions, and ultimately, better outcomes." The board members exchanged glances, and Sophie could see a few of them nodding slightly. This was promising. She moved on to the next slide: metrics on employee retention. "Our retention rate has improved by 15% in the last quarter, and we've also seen a decline in unplanned absences. This suggests that our employees are feeling more committed to the company and are less likely to seek opportunities elsewhere." She paused to let that sink in. This was exactly what the company needed: stability in the workforce. Sophie moved through the next few slides, detailing the improvements in productivity, the success of the employee innovation days, and the increased collaboration across departments. There was data to show that the teams were not only working better together, but were also driving new product ideas that had the potential to add value to their key markets. As she finished the presentation, Sophie felt a slight tension ease from her shoulders. She had shown them the facts, the numbers they cared about, but more importantly, she had shown them the human side of the business. She had demonstrated that investing in people wasn't just a feel-good initiative, but something that directly impacted the bottom line. But then, a voice broke the silence. "This is impressive, Sophie," said Daniel Stone, one of the board members. "But we still need to see these results in the financials. Engagement is nice, but how does it translate to profits? How long before these changes show up on the balance sheet?" The question hit Sophie like a cold splash of water. She knew this was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. The truth was, the financial results wouldn't be fully visible until the next quarter. The cultural changes had started to show early signs of improvement, but it was still a work in progress. Sophie took a deep breath and looked directly at Daniel. "I understand your concern," she said, her tone calm but firm. "The changes we've made are part of a long-term strategy. Yes, the financial benefits might take a quarter or two to fully materialize, but the key point is that we're positioning ourselves for sustainable growth. By investing in people, we're ensuring that our talent stays with us. Our teams collaborate more effectively, and we have a workforce that's engaged and committed. That's the foundation for future profits." Alex watched the board members carefully, his expression unreadable. Sophie could tell he was watching them as closely as she was, waiting for their reactions. There was silence in the room as the board members exchanged looks, and Sophie's heart beat a little faster with each passing second. Finally, Claudia, the CFO, spoke up. "I have to admit, Sophie, I wasn't sure about this approach at first," she said, her voice measured. "But the numbers are hard to ignore. You've shown that this shift is already paying off in terms of engagement and retention. I think we're all beginning to see that this is more than just a feel-good initiative." Sophie exhaled. "Thank you, Claudia," she said, relieved. "We're on the right path. This is just the beginning." After a few more discussions, the meeting finally came to a close. Alex turned to Sophie with a small, knowing smile. "You did it," he said quietly. "You proved them wrong." Sophie smiled back, but it was a smile that carried the weight of what still lay ahead. "Not yet," she replied. "This is just one battle. The war isn't over." The days following the board meeting were a whirlwind of mixed emotions for Sophie. She had won a victory, a crucial one, but she knew that this was just the beginning. The board had agreed to give her approach more time, but there was no guarantee that the results would continue to come in at the pace they needed. There was still a lot of work ahead, and Sophie could feel the pressure mounting with each passing day. Despite the long hours, Sophie couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism. The company was beginning to turn a corner. Employees were more engaged than they had been in months, and collaboration between departments was starting to feel natural. The employee innovation days were proving to be a success, and there was a noticeable spark of creativity in the air. Sophie knew that these small wins would add up, but they had to be backed up with solid results. But as she sat at her desk one morning, reviewing the latest numbers and trying to prepare for the next quarter, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Alex. "We need to talk." 3 p.m. in my office. Sophie stared at the message for a moment, the words echoing in her mind. Was this another challenge? A setback? The uncertainty made her stomach churn, but she quickly brushed it aside. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now at 3 p.m. Sophie walked into Alex's office, trying to mask the unease that had crept into her chest. He was standing by the window, looking out over the city. When she walked in, he turned and gave her a nod. "Come in, Sophie." "Have a seat." Sophie sat down, folding her hands in her lap. There was a different air in the room now. It wasn't as heavy as it had been in their earlier meetings, but there was still a palpable sense of uncertainty. "I wanted to touch base on a couple of things," Alex said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made Sophie wonder if something was off. "The board is impressed with the engagement results, but they're concerned about the next steps. They want to see long-term profitability, and soon. They want a clear growth plan that shows tangible returns within the next 6 months. We have to move faster." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. This was what she had been fearing. The pressure to deliver was now higher than ever. She had known it wasn't going to be easy, but she didn't expect it to feel this intense. "I understand," Sophie said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "I'm already working on the plan, but we need to be cautious. If we push too hard, too fast, we risk losing what we've already gained. We've built a foundation based on trust, and I don't want to sacrifice that for short-term gains." Alex looked at her, his gaze calculating. "I get it, but we need to find a balance. I'm putting a lot of trust in you, Sophie. The board is on edge, and they're looking to me for answers. I can't afford to look like I'm stalling." Sophie swallowed, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "I won't stall. I'll have a solid plan ready in a week. But it's going to take time for this shift to truly show financial impact." Alex nodded, though his expression remained tight. "All right, I'm counting on you. We need to show them that this people-first approach isn't just some idealistic dream. We need to see hard numbers, and we need to see them fast." Sophie stood up, her resolve hardening. "I won't let you down. I'll make it work." The pressure builds. The next few days felt like a race against time. Sophie worked around the clock, compiling data, speaking with department heads, and making sure that the people-first initiatives were aligned with the company's financial goals. She reviewed everything from employee productivity to customer satisfaction and started to craft a strategy that would prove, once and for all, that the cultural shift was more than just a nice idea. But as the hours wore on, Sophie felt herself growing increasingly isolated. She was pushing harder than ever, but it wasn't just about the results anymore. It was about proving that her vision was the right one. The pressure from the board and Alex was palpable, and she knew that if things didn't improve soon, she'd lose the support she had worked so hard to earn. One evening, as Sophie sat in her office, scrolling through the latest projections, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had spent so much time working on the company's success that she had neglected something just as important: her own well-being. The long hours, the constant stress, and the fear of failure was starting to take a toll. She hadn't seen her friends in weeks, and the personal life she had once treasured felt like a distant memory. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Maya. "Can we talk? I'm worried about you." Sophie hesitated for a moment before typing back, "I'm fine. Just busy. We're so close, Maya. We can't afford to slow down now, I know. But I think you're pushing yourself too hard. You can't do it all on your own. Let's grab dinner tonight. No work, just food." Sophie smiled at the message. It had been a while since she'd allowed herself to take a break. Maya was right. She had been burning the candle at both ends. And if she didn't take care of herself, everything else would fall apart. "All right. Dinner sounds good." Sophie typed back, feeling a small weight lift off her shoulders. Dinner with Maya that night. Sophie met Maya at a cozy restaurant near the office. The lights were dim, the atmosphere relaxed, everything Sophie needed to unwind. They sat down at a small table in the corner, and for the first time in weeks, Sophie felt like she could breathe. "So, how are you really doing?" Maya asked, leaning forward. "I know you're pushing hard for the company, but I can tell you're running on fumes." Sophie sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "I feel like I'm walking a tightrope. I have to prove that this people-first approach works. But it's not just the board. I'm worried about letting Alex down, too. He's been so supportive, and if this doesn't pan out, I don't know what's next." Maya took a sip of her wine and nodded. You've been working non-stop for months, but you can't carry this weight alone. If the company's going to change, it needs to be a team effort. You've done an amazing job so far, Sophie. Don't lose sight of what you've accomplished. Sophie smiled weakly, grateful for Maya's words. I know, I just need to make it work. The last thing I want is for all of this to fall apart. Maya smiled back. You're doing the right thing. It's just a matter of patience now. The people-first approach isn't going to turn things around overnight, but it will. Trust yourself, and trust that the work you're doing will show results when the time is right. For the first time in a long time, Sophie allowed herself to relax. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't need to have them right away. But she knew she had something more important than just the numbers she had, the people who believed in her, and that was enough to keep going.